Well, what's changed now is we have quite a few organizations working on climate restoration and making progress. So we have the book, and that makes it very real. We got a statement from Pope Francis 2 years ago saying climate restoration is of utmost importance, and that made it real. And more and more organizations committed to it. And so anyone who has a doubt about being involved with climate restoration, they can look at the growing numbers of organizations and individuals involved and feel comfortable that they won't look like a fool if they get involved too.
Can you just give us the layman's definition of restoration as opposed to just reaching net zero?
Yeah, climate restoration means getting the climate back to levels that humans have actually survived long term. And the value of that's pretty clear, I think. The net zero just means not making it any worse. And the people have wanted net zero because they didn't want to be responsible for choosing a particular goal, like level that humans have survived. And so it's a little bit like some people will say, well, I'll have the number of children that God wills me to. That way they don't have to choose, that God wills it. And net zero is very much like letting God will what happens to humanity.
Can you just explain the lack, it's not blind spot, but the lack of understanding that people have? I mean, there's the common misconception that, if we just fall in line with the Paris Climate Accord, that everything's going to be okay.
Well, people will sometimes, I think many people think that fulfilling the Paris Climate Accord will leave us okay. In fact, I don't think anyone's ever said that in public. There's no evidence for it. But it's one of those things that unless you say the opposite, and I say that the Paris Climate Accord is actually a Paris suicide pact, that since there's no good reason to think that we will survive, that it's a good assumption that we should do something that we will survive.
Actually, it's a thought of mine, so you may not agree with it, but and if you could articulate this, if you do agree with it, but it seems to me that if globally we set an objective, the public assumes that if we fall in line with that objective, then it's kind of implied that it's going to be okay, and it's not.
Yes, yes. In the past, let's see. Let me start this again. Say your question again.
Oh, yeah.
You can just do a few words of it.
Yeah, just that the public follow the decision makers, and the decision makers have set a goal. So the public thinks if we fall in line with that goal, that it's going to be okay, and so it's kind of implicit.
Yeah. So when decision makers make a goal, we always assume that they have a good reason for that goal. Now, probably everyone knows that climate is very complicated. And as I've talked with leaders, both political and theological and, of course, scientific, everyone says, well, I'm not the ultimate expert in climate. And so no one has taken responsibility for, is this the good goal or not? In 1970, stopping emissions could have left the planet habitable. And of course, that was about the time of the Arab oil embargo. By 1980, Ronald Reagan had a choice between using science to figure out what to do or using a free market. And he chose the free market religion. And everyone assumed that was the right thing to do. But no one thought about it. And so climate restoration, and I established climate restoration with the purpose of establishing a new goal, which is the survival and flourishing of humanity.
So achieving climate restoration, and this leads on to your book really, can you just explain first off, just as a quick overview, the 4 areas that you're focusing on?
Yeah, well, for climate restoration, it boils down to getting CO2 back to levels that humans have survived, and the optimal level seems to be 280 parts per million of CO2, getting methane back to safe levels again, and especially preventing methane burst that's beginning right now, preventing that from becoming fatal or an extinction event, and then restoring population to levels that that the planet has sustained for at least 1,000 years. Because remember, our current population just 100 years ago was a quarter of what it is today. And so although all of us alive today are alive today, it's still 4 times as many as were alive 100 years ago, and 10 times more than 250 years ago.
Gosh, okay. So can you go into each of those restoration, I guess beginning with the CO2, just go through those 4 points.
Yeah, so as we developed the book, my co-author Carol Douglas and I, we saw that there are really what we call the big 4. And these 4 solutions handle just about everything. And it sort of flies in the face of the myth that there are no silver bullets. And so the first one is the method for removing CO2 that nature uses to remove 1 trillion tons, which we need to do. And that is iron fertilization of the oceans, or ocean restoration. The second is the method that nature uses over 100 million years and has removed 99% of the CO2 on our planet, or sequestered it in limestone. So that's the first 2. The third one is a variation on ocean fertilization, which is using seaweed rather than microplankton. Seaweed is macroplankton. And the fourth one is methane oxidation. And that's a variation or an emphasis on one of the methods that nature uses to oxidize methane in the atmosphere. And that has the benefit both of cooling the planet now, and it allows us to scale up this methane oxidation. So if the methane burst does get as bad as the last time our planet was in this situation, where we lost it was an extinction event that lost a third of the world's species. If that does become serious, like it did last time, then we can actually oxidize the methane before we lose a lot of harvests and lose our own species.
Just going in reverse order then, while we're on methane oxidation, can you just